Good morning and welcome to the fourth hour of the Greg Belfrage Show. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a terrific Labor Day weekend, nice extended weekend. Very restful, at least it was for me, and I hope it was for you too. So, back at it today. Let's see what's going on. I don't have these in any particular order of importance. I was kind of racing this morning to get a few things lined up for you this morning. So, Kamala Harris says Fox News, Kamala Harris accused of wearing earbuds to avoid reporters. Doesn't make sense, says, somebody you never heard of, but was on Fox and Friends first, talking about now Kamala Harris is wearing earbuds to avoid the questions from reporters. Didn't hear them, didn't hear them, wasn't able to answer the questions. And then Fox News Channel showed video footage this morning of Kamala Harris walking up the steps to the airplane, and she's on the phone, and she may have been in a very deep conversation. Can you tell if I'm actually on the phone or if I'm just, making it look like I'm on the phone? I don't know. But the fact that we don't even trust what we see, I think is kind of telling right now. So she's wearing earbuds in order to avoid questions. I pulled up some stories here, and now that I look at, like that one, some of these, I just don't want to. I really don't want to share. I do want to share this. Representative Andy Beggs. This is at justthenews.com. Justthenews.com. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona says that Arizona conservatives of all kinds, so whether they are John McCain Republicans or whether they're part of the MAGA crowd, they're coming together in order to defeat Kamala Harris at the ballot. He said, if you're a Republican or right-leaning, you know that the Trump ticket and Republican ticket from top to bottom is going to do you far better than the other side, he says. So Arizona Republicans banding together. I thought there would be more to this. There isn't. So it must just be a comment that he made. Let me refresh that and see if I can get any more details there. No, that's it. That's a short story. One I expect better from justthenews.com. Generally, they're pretty in-depth. A lot of their stories are pretty in-depth. Also, this is Jonathan Turley, as you know, is somebody that I greatly admire. Jonathan Turley, who is a professor of law, who has got a piece, and this came out a few days ago. He said, this week, a federal judge ruled that a lawsuit by Elon Musk against Media Matters can move forward. And he says, in what could prove a significant case, not just for Media Matters, but for the entire media industry. He said the decision comes at the same time as other court wins for former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin against the New York Times and a Navy veteran against CNN. Turley writes, for years, media organizations and journalism schools have expressly abandoned objectivity in favor of advocacy journalism. This abandonment of neutrality has coincided, unsurprisingly, with a drop in public faith in media to record lows. Yeah, that has been going on for quite a while, that we have seen the lack of faith that you and I have in media outlets. It has just been falling like a rock. And he goes on to talk about the number of different cases and what happened to CNN facing trial from a Um, this is a lawsuit by a Navy veteran, Zachary Young. He was the subject of a hit piece over his work to extract endangered people out of Afghanistan after the takeover from the Taliban, and we all know what a uh, crap show that was. And this goes on. He, in a segment on CNN, um, Turley gets into this in detail, and I suggest you read it because rather than me sharing, I would literally have to read this to be able to explain all of this. But he says the allegations in the lawsuit read like a textbook on advocacy journalism. Media Matters is accused of knowingly misrepresenting the real user experience by manipulating the algorithms. So the complaint accuses Media Matters of running its manipulation then. And this goes on at length, which is pretty common for Jonathan Turley because he's a very thoughtful guy. But he said these cases still face tough challenges, including challenging jury polls in places like New York. However, they are exposing the bias that now characterizes much of American journalism. In the age of advocacy journalism, a bill has come due. That is why Musk's lawsuit against Media Matters, well, matters. So Jonathan Turley is a professor of public interest law at George Washington University. And when he speaks, I really pay attention. I listen because he shares things that are pretty. And again, the fact what Elon Musk is doing, and he talks about the fact, Elon Musk has faced threats before, and he's got so much money, he just doesn't care. Elon Musk just doesn't care. He prods ahead anyway, despite the loss of potential revenue, and I think that says something about Elon Musk. The fact that he will proceed regardless of what that will do to his revenue stream. He just refuses to back down, and he's got the money to be able to do these things. Donald Trump is responding yet again this morning to what happened last week at Arlington National Cemetery. That story is still, I noticed it was trending this morning, and I avoided it, to be honest with you. I just avoided the story because I thought, man, surely by now this thing will have run its course. Donald Trump now is reacting on Truth Social, and he said there was no conflict or fighting at Arlington National Cemetery last week. It was a made-up story by Comrade Kamala and her misinformation squad. She made it all up to make up for the fact that she and Sleepy Joe have blood on their hands for the incompetent Afghanistan withdrawal. He said the most embarrassing day in U.S. history. They should have been at Arlington, not on a beach or studying for a debate. He said, thanks to you, my friends, the great Gold Star families, for revealing the truth of a beautiful day of honor. Could not have been a nicer moment. There were no fights or problems, only in the heads of those that are destroying our country, Trump said on Truth Social. And it was, the more you looked at that, and I covered it pretty extensively last week because, well, it was trending and there were media outlets that were sharing it, and they would share part of the story. One of the problems I think is out there now is you get the media that shares a portion of the story, but they don't tell you the rest of it. They don't share the reactions from Gold Star families. And we invited Donald Trump to be here. We said we wanted to take pictures with Donald Trump. And I don't know, again, I saw there were still some lingering stories that were trending this morning, and some of that because of the extended holiday weekend, I thought, well, that could be because of the holiday weekend. So I didn't mention anything at all this morning because I hit it pretty hard last week. These stories were trending and I reacted to them and I talked about them in depth and on Friday morning, talking about them, the reaction and the things that you aren't being told. You know, there are portions out there and you go and look at, the media does this. They choose portions of the story that they want to share. They ignore the portions that fly in the face of advocacy journalism. That's what we see today. By and large, you see a lot of this advocacy journalism is that you're advocating a particular point of view. You are not trying to give a non-biased, um, give folks a non-biased perspective of what's going on, as you report the news. It's advocacy journalism. And I have seen that phrase for quite some time, and it's really taken hold. Jonathan Turley pointing it out. And in that piece that I just shared with you, and I think that's what we're seeing is this advocacy journalism on this story about what happened at Arlington National Cemetery versus the reality of what actually occurred. What is it that happened? And I've always believed that that was the job of journalists was to tell us what actually happened rather than advocating for any particular, you know, that whole phrase that advocacy journalism and those that embrace it has always been pretty distasteful to me. That's certainly not what I learned during the time, that I was going to college and the kinds of stories that journalists are supposed to, produce. Um, you want them to be based in fact, not in promoting for a particular point of view. That's what commentary does, um, versus reporting. And now you've got basically what it means then is that advocacy journalism, it boils down to commentary versus reporting actual facts. So here's my commentary based on, I mean, that's what people like like I do, or um, that do this kind of work. You you look at events and things that are transpiring, and I offer you my thoughts on it, my commentary on it. Um, Whether you agree or disagree certainly is up to you. But I make that very clear. I want you to understand that I'm not out there reporting on these stories. Now, I do interviews from time to time, and during those, I try to ask questions rather than make comments, although sometimes I make very clear comments. Um, but again, where I'm at and my point of view and where I stand, where I come from as I do that. Um, this whole Arlington National Cemetery story that Donald Trump is still having to respond to that, I think really shows the fact that the media has been very unclear about what happened. And I think there's a lot of confusion. And I think the confusion is created by design and on purpose. That and those so-called advocacy journalists, um, often that's what they're involved in, is really creating more uncertainty than yeah, they're advocating for something in particular, but in terms of news that they're using, they're not shedding light on the news of the day in a way that you and I could, make it understandable to the folks on Main Street. That's really kind of a little bit shocking to me. There's also another story this morning at the Blaze that I wanted to share with you. This is coming from theblaze.com. They've got a story about Tim Walz walking away after he was asked about Hirsch Goldberg Poland. He's a hostage that was held by Hamas, and there were ceremonies for him. He was killed, and there were ceremonies for him that took place over the weekend. And Tim Walz was asked about this when he was at the Minnesota State Fair. So he participated then, talked about how the Minnesota State Fair is the best in the Midwest. And a reporter asked, "What's your reaction to the 6 hostages being found in Gaza?" And a staffer of Tim Walz jumped in right away and said, "All right, thanks, everybody." Ended the question. So the question was asked, but never answered. And the person who jumped in on it was a national press secretary for the Harris Walz campaign. He's been a longtime political operative in Minnesota, writes The Blaze. So Walz's decision not to answer that question been pretty heavily criticized then by Republicans as well as some supporters of Israel who have been very critical of the fact that Tim Walz did not respond and instead then sometime after that had a statement on X responding to the question. Now, again, when you've got these politicians that are responding via X, generally that's after the campaign has had some time to put together a statement. So, okay, that question being asked at the Minnesota State Fair, Tim Walz didn't answer it. Later, few hours later, has a response on X instead of responding to the person who asked the question at the state fair. And that is not a good perception in the minds of many people. You know, they don't look at that very, he dodged the question when it was asked live on the spot, dodged it, and then a statement coming off on X several hours later. And Donald Trump certainly took notice of it. The Trump War Room said yesterday, Tim Walz runs away from a question about dead hostages found in Gaza. Today, Kamala pulls the old "I'm on my phone" trick to avoid the press. If it's too difficult for you to answer questions, you probably shouldn't be running the country. So that was the response from the Trump War Room. So this is, I think, what we're seeing from Kamala Harris and from Tim Walz is really kind of troubling when you see, again, Tim Walz running away from a question about, and this is where you get the handlers there and these folks, folks who are part of the campaign who immediately then, "Oh, no, we're not going to take that. Sorry, time's up." We have seen that happen very many times. Joe Biden's handlers, to the point of it just becoming ridiculous sometimes, that they would just jump in. Joe Biden actually wanting to answer a question. Remember that? Joe Biden was wanting to answer questions, and his team would immediately jump in. You're seeing the same thing now happening with Tim Walz, and it's like, who are these people running the government? Who are these people are running these campaigns? That they have that kind of authority, that Tim Walz should have been able to respond to that. Honestly, how would you react in a situation like that? If you are the candidate and you're leading your country or you're leading your party, you're running for president, and you have somebody who jumps in and says, "That's it." I would not respond well to that. I would not. I would feel a need to have to respond. I would say, "I'm just going to take this last question and then we'll move on." But in answer to that, boom, now I've got my response. and I'm afraid maybe I'll have to cut it short because we're off onto something else. I got to get running. I promise I'm going to release more on that. We'll have more on that. But the idea that the the campaign team says, no, that's it, and they call an end to it, that to me is absolutely wrong. That because then it again, who's running the show? These campaign people, or who is it that is on the ballot? Tim Walz, or is it his campaign team? You understand what I'm saying? That is really kind of surprising to me that Tim Walz, well, it's not surprising that Tim Walz didn't do it. I wouldn't allow that. If I had somebody, if I were running and somebody from the campaign jumped in and I would feel a need to answer that question, I would say, let me respond to this before we leave. We got to wrap it up here, but let me respond first to your question and boom, then have an answer rather than just, oh, yeah, I guess we're done. Got to go. What message does that send to the American public? I just think it's really kind of shocking, that you see that. And then Kamala Harris with the old earbuds camp, she's got her earbuds in so she can't take questions from the media. Overall, I think all of that, when you combine all of these elements, that says something, doesn't it? About these folks and do they have answers to the questions that they're being asked? Kamala Harris clearly didn't have answers to some of the, what would you do on day one? When she was asked that on CNN last week, what would you do on day one? And, the word salads begin. So much so that Dana Bash had to pose the question a second time. Yes, but what would you do on day one? So clearly, Kamala had not answered the question. And I think that's what we're going to see. And I talked about this a little bit on the air this morning about, the NBC reporting about how insiders saying that at the upcoming Trump and Kamala Harris debate that they're going to try to put the focus on Donald Trump. Well, sure they are. I knew that. I don't need NBC insiders to tell me what. I know that because they don't answer questions. Well, Tim Walz, a great example in the way he handled the Minnesota State Fair. He didn't answer the question. Even when he was on CNN, he didn't really answer some of the questions, and Kamala was nothing but just nonsense. And again, I just remain a bit dumbstruck that they're doing so well in the polls. How can they be doing that well in the polls? Because that's just in defiance of, every bit of common sense and reality. It's whether you've got your feet on the ground, and there's no way that we can force Americans to just have their feet on the ground, take a common sense look and view at what's going on. Unfortunately, a lot of Americans, and I mean by a lot, millions, we're talking about millions and millions of Americans that don't. They just don't. And there's no way to make them do that. And so what happens next, I think, is anybody's guess. But what the media is up to and what they're involved in, what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are up to is as, plain as the nose on your face. And for a lot of folks, it's just so striking that I think you find yourself at a loss to explain how is it that so many other millions of people don't see this, because it's just so crystal clear to me. It just becomes more and more obvious, I think, each day, what folks focus on and the things that I focus on and become very obvious to me. They're, very clearly not the same. I'm going to leave it there for now. I appreciate the comments. Sean had said, frustrating but unsurprising. The Democrats and their hacks dodge questions. Yeah, I don't find that surprising either because it's again, what's shocking to me is that people will accept that. That's what's shocking to me. Not that the politicians do it. What's shocking to me is that so many people accept it. And Lauren said, as a leader, you have to make on the fly decisions. If you can't make an on the fly comment, I agree with that. You'd have to be able to do things on the fly, on the run, on the go. And Tim Walz was clearly relieved, I think, that having watched that video, moving on. Again, I think that says something to us about what kinds of people these are. If they are willing to, yeah, that's a tough question. Can't answer it. And Tim Walz very eager to move on. Well, why is Tim Walz so eager to move on? Why couldn't he have answered that question? He's out there at the Minnesota State Fair. The whole point of being out there is to be seen and to talk to people, right? And but then suddenly having to leave when questions become inconvenient, that ought to say something to us about what kinds of people these are. I'm going to leave it there for today. I want to thank you so much for letting me join you, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube. Thanks to all of you so much who are here. I really, really, really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you to let one person know. Let one person know about what we're doing, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, doesn't matter, but let one person know what we're up to. And I heard, here's the thing. I heard Kim Commando, and she was talking about this a little bit on her show that aired the other day on Kello, and about, trying to encourage people to follow her. And I thought, she's got a platform of millions of people. There are folks who literally, they've got millions of people who listen to them and their shows. And even they have an incredibly hard time getting people to follow them, to hit the like button. It takes real work. So if you will hit the like button for me, it's very much appreciated. If you will get one other person to listen to the fourth hour of the Greg Belfrage Show, who maybe hasn't followed it or hasn't watched it before, very, very much appreciated. And it makes a difference. And I'm seeing that in some of my numbers. So thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate all of you so much. And I hope to see you again tomorrow. So we'll leave it there for now. So long until tomorrow, my friend, and may God bless.